Before starting the talk, please join me in invoking the Buddha's name 3 times. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. Good morning, beautiful Sangha. Finally have my voice back. Literally last week after the sutra study class, I lost my voice completely for like 3 days. Which was nice actually. For once I can shut up. Alrighty. I also want to thank Quang for conducting last class while I was out of town. And I believe he went over quickly the exercises of the mindfulness of body that we've completed. So mindfulness of the body had 11 exercises, and we covered 10 of them. So thank you again for going over that with the class. So today we'll continue on the second mindfulness of, the second of the 4 foundations of mindfulness, which is mindfulness of feelings. And in this mindfulness of feelings, we have 2 exercises. I will get through the first exercise and probably half of the second, and finish up the last part of the second exercise next class. Yeah, I'll probably do that. Feelings is a big topic, as we know, right? Feelings control our lives. All right, so we'll read the exercise as it's in the sutra, which is the Satipatthana Sutra, the Sutra of the 4 Foundations of Mindfulness. In exercise 11, the Buddha tells us, whenever the practitioner has a pleasant feeling, he is aware, I am experiencing a pleasant feeling. Whenever he has a painful feeling, he is aware, I am experiencing a painful feeling. Whenever he experiences a feeling which is neither pleasant nor painful, he is aware, I am experiencing a neutral feeling. So this is exercise 11 of the foundation of feelings. So in this foundation, there are 3 types of feelings that we will need to be aware of, and they are, of course, pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral feelings. So this exercise, or these exercises, I guess, are to help us identify and be in touch with those feelings as they arise, as we endure them, and as they fade away from our minds. And so that way, when we have any type of feeling, right, and this is why I've always emphasized trying to use labels when thoughts or emotions or feelings or distractions arise, because these labels are essentially a form of being able to identify what is arising in the mind, right? But sometimes those labels can be very superficial in the sense that it's just, person or talking or whatever, right? Something very superficial that's heard, which is fine. Because it's an external factor, and we don't know the root or the cause of those things as they arise sometimes, right? And so for feelings, when an unpleasant feeling arises, at least within us, that we're not in a hurry to try to chase it away or try to avoid any unpleasant feelings, which is something that we often do, especially in meditation, especially when you're sitting in meditation for a long period of time, and you have an unpleasant feeling of discomfort or pain, right? Our habit reaction to that is to assuage that pain or discomfort, right? By adjusting or moving or repositioning yourself. But to be conscious, to be conscious of those feelings, you have to come back to them, right? Come back to the breathing. And the Buddha tells us by making the observation of breathing in, I know that an unpleasant feeling has arisen in me. Breathing out, I know that this is an unpleasant feeling, that this unpleasant feeling is present in me. So whenever there's a pleasant or neutral feeling, we have to practice mindful observation according to that feeling that we're having. So we know that our feeling is us, and for that moment, we are that feeling. Think of times of anger, for instance, or you're in an argument, right? We have those emotions of anger or frustration or anxiety or whatever it may be, and we believe, right, that those emotions that we're feeling are causes because of this person that's yelling at us or in an argument or whatnot, right? We have this reaction that you are causing me these emotional feelings. You are causing me these negative feelings of frustration or anger. But if we are applying mindful observation to those feelings that arose, we can come back to our meditation, come back to our practice and recognize that these feelings are not generated by this person or people or thing. It is generated within us, and there's a root and there's a cause, there's a substance to why that feeling arose or why we had that feeling. And the more that we're able to be observant of these feelings, of any feeling, whether pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, right, that helps us become not to be drowned in those feelings, not to be terrorized by those feelings. But we also don't want to reject those feelings because, again, part of our practice is to be in contact with those feelings. So if we are able to call a pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral feeling by its name, and we can identify it clearly and recognize it more deeply, then our attitude and the clinging that we have to those feelings will change, right? And that gives us the attitude of being able to let go, or upeksha in Sanskrit, right? Letting go. Upeksha literally means equanimity, but it is by this practice of letting go that we have the equanimity of mind. And letting go here doesn't necessarily mean literally letting go of a feeling, right, of not having the feeling, but it's the letting go of being able to sit and be with the feeling and not let it affect you, right? And that is what we mean when we say by letting things go. It's not disconnecting, it's not severing, it's not trying to kill off feelings or emotions, right? That's not what we mean by letting go. Letting go here means being able to accept what is happening, to sit with what is happening, acknowledge what is happening, and deal with what is happening. It's only by that means that we're able to truly understand and see where these emotions or these feelings are coming from, right? To get it to its source, to get to its roots and its substance, and deal with it there, and be okay with it, right? Through our practice. And that way, that's the means of letting go. So in Buddhism, we know that a person is comprised of the 5 aggregates, right? The 5 skandhas of form, feeling, perception, mental formation, and consciousness. And each aggregate, the Buddha tells us, is like a river. So the body is a river, right? In which every cell is a drop of water. And all of them are in constant transformation movement, right? Just like water, it's not stagnant and it just sit there. It's constantly moving, it's constantly changing. So if you go to a river and pick up a cup and take a cup of water from the river and dump it out, and you grab another cup, that water is a completely different kind of water. It's not the same water from the first cup, right? And so our emotions, our feelings, and the river of our body is the same way. And we also have a river of feelings, right? And every drop of water is a a feeling. It's always constant and moving. And so all the other aggregates are also rivers in our body. And the thing we need to remember here is we have to, as we sit in meditation, and especially in meditation, right, we're sitting at the bank of this river of our body, feelings, perception, mental formations, and consciousness. And we're observing as the water flows and it's constantly changing. Likewise, our feelings are always moving and constantly changing. And so as they move and we see them float down the river, right, we want to observe them and call them out. This is a feeling of anger. This is a feeling of discomfort. This is a feeling of anxiety. This is hatred. This is jealousy. Even the good stuff. This is pleasure. This is desire. This is goodness, whatever it may be, right? We have to observe things as they move. And so, that's essentially our whole goal in meditation, right? That's how we label things. So as things come and go, right, we may not necessarily see them as a river necessarily, but regardless, as things arise in meditation, distractions, emotions, or feelings, just like seeing these feelings race down the river and we call them out, we also want to call those other feelings and emotions out as well. And we know, of course, that our feelings usually play an important role in directing our thoughts and our minds, because our thoughts, when our thoughts arise, right, and they become linked to each other around those feelings that are present, we have to be mindful of those feelings, and the situation is able to change. Because it's only the thoughts in themselves don't stir up emotion necessarily, right? It only stirs up emotion when feelings are attached to it. So if you have a thought of a terrible coworker, right, automatically your feelings of dislike or aversion or whatever may be toward that coworker links with it, right? They're together and they become linked. And so we have to be especially mindful of those thoughts that arise, whether in or out of meditation, and what feelings become attached to it, what feelings become linked to it. Because if we can then remove or be detached from the feelings that are connected to these thoughts, then it won't stir up any negative or potential negative emotion or unwholesome emotions within us. And so the Buddha then tells us that if we continue to observe the feeling mindfully, we'll be able to see its substance and its roots. And this kind of seeing empowers us, the observer, and we're able to see the nature of something that when we are able to see the nature of something, and we are able to transcend it and not be led astray or corrupted by it anymore. This goes back to the attachment of feelings to these thoughts, right? Because if we're unmindful of these negative thoughts that we're having about a coworker, then they're going to continue to boil up, right? And they're going to continue to manifest and grow to even potentially more dangerous thoughts, right? Now you may have a thought of dislike, but the more you hang on and obsess over that thought of dislike, it may grow into you wanting to sabotage their life or sabotage their work or try to blackmail them or try to throw them under the bus or try to whatever it may be, right? It can fester and grow into potentially something dangerous and extremely unwholesome. And so the quicker we're able to see these observations in the mind, the quicker we're able to recognize feelings as they arise and tackle them when they arise before they're able to manifest or boil over, the quicker we're able to subdue them and let go and bring our mind back to the mind of upeksha, of equanimity. So that's the quick version of exercise 11. So exercise 11 is essentially just being able to generally recognize feelings as they arise. And then in the second exercise, exercise 12, seeing the roots of feelings and identifying neutral feelings, this is the exercise of trying to be a little bit more specific with the feelings that arise. But it is a continuation of the 11th exercise. And it does, excuse me, actually, let me just read the exercise really quick first. So exercise 11, the Buddha tells us, when he experiences a pleasant feeling based in the body, he is aware, I am experiencing a pleasant feeling based in the body. When he experiences a pleasant feeling based in the mind, he is aware, I am experiencing a pleasant feeling based in the mind. When he experiences a painful feeling based in the body, he is aware, I'm experiencing a painful feeling based in the body. When he experiences a painful feeling based in the mind, he is aware, I am experiencing a painful feeling based in the mind. When he experiences a neutral feeling based in the body, he is aware I'm experiencing a neutral feeling based in the body. When he experiences a neutral feeling based in the mind, he is aware I'm experiencing a neutral feeling based in the mind. So again, here, this exercise is helping us to identify specifically the emotions that arise, whether they are pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. And we know that our feelings, whether they are pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, can have either a physical, a psychological, or physiological root. And so when we mindfully observe our feelings, we discover those roots. We discover the substance of those feelings. Because if you have an unpleasant feeling because you're tired from staying up last night, like I did, right? This is an unpleasant feeling based on the physiological root, right? But regardless, to be able to identify the roots of our feelings is not going to be enough, right? Because we have to look more deeply in order to see how those feelings even manifested in the first place and understand their their true substance. So to know a feeling is not to just see its roots, but also see the things that have grown from it, right? And so the flowers that bloom from these roots, the fruits that came upon these roots, right? So this is why I emphasize every once in a while the why meditation, because it's not enough just to acknowledge that you're angry, right? Because if you just acknowledge that you're angry, you just know that you're angry. But more importantly, we have to know why we're angry. Where does this anger come from? Where did this anger manifest? How did it manifest? What was the cause, right? And so we dig deeper and deeper and deeper, because at the superficial level, we just see this tree of anger. Well, just seeing the tree isn't going to be enough. If you want to get rid of it, right, you can chop it down, but it's going to grow back, right? Because the roots are still intact. And so we have to go deeper into those feelings of anger and recognize the substance, recognize where it manifested from, how did it manifest, where did it come from. So for example, we can take drinking alcohol and smoking as an example, right? Because for someone, those could be pleasant feelings of drinking and smoking. But someone else, it could be unpleasant, right? To you, drinking may be, oh, this is the most amazing thing I ever put in my mouth before, right? This wine is just fantabulous, right? And smoking makes you feel all cool and warm and fuzzy inside. But someone else, drinking and smoking cause a very unpleasant feeling. They can think it's the most disgusting thing they've ever tried, right? They can cough, they can choke, they can just regret their life choices. And so there's an element of habit and time and our own psychology and physiology that are all present in these roots of drinking and smoking, or any feeling other than that, actually. So if we're able to look into our feelings and see that either the psychological, physical, or physiological habits, not only from our own habits of smoking or drinking or whatever else, but also the habits of society, whose products that we're consuming, right? Think of the habit of drinking and smoking, for instance. What were the causes of drinking and smoking in the first place? Where did the desire to drink and smoke come from? Actual question. Huh? Feeling. Feeling from what? Where did that feeling come from?
I lack something.
Say what?
I lack something. I need something.
Right. And this feeling of lack can come from your environment or society, right? You see family drinking, like, oh, I want to participate and be with them, so I'm going to drink too. Your friends are smoking, like, oh, I want to be in their circle, I'm going to smoke too, right? And so our environment and our habits of where we're at is also a major influence on our feelings of things. Even commercials, there's still commercials for tequila all the time out there, right? There's commercials for Camel cigarettes and other things, right? And advertisements and ads and all these things. So we have to be able to recognize that these feelings are being imposed on us, right? Subconsciously, unconsciously sometimes. And so when we have a feeling of wanting to smoke or drink or whatever it may be, we have to ask ourselves, well, you have to be aware that not just of the fact that you have a feeling of wanting to drink or smoke, but why do we have this feeling of wanting to drink and smoke? Where did this desire come from, right? And again, you can ask yourself why, and backtrack. Like, oh, I grew up, my family, everyone drank. I started drinking when I was 14, 15, 16, whatever, right? Started smoking when I was 7. I don't know, right? It's stupid stuff. But you can kind of backtrack and figure out those roots. Because when we do that, generally, if we're able to backtrack to the very source, the cause of those feelings, it becomes an easier way for us to be able to let it go, right? Versus if you think, oh, I'm just smoking and drinking out of habit, out of boredom, because of free time, right? That's not really a good enough excuse. It doesn't really inspire a feeling of wanting to let go. But if we're able to backtrack and get to the source, to the roots of that problem or that issue, and see how it generated or how it manifested, it's usually not all the time, but typically, at least for things that are harmful to us, it's generally initiated from a place of environment, right? Or habits of others. So again, it goes back to your family, friends, they started, you started, and now it's just a thing. But on the other side of that, on the pleasant side of feelings, when we hear someone praise us, for instance, right? We have a pleasant feeling, and that pleasant feeling also needs to be examined, right? Obviously, we have the right to accept pleasant feelings, but we have to know that in our meditation practice, that we need to observe mindfully in order to have insight into the nature of our feeling. So if in our mindful observation of this praise that we get, right, we see that those words of praise were based in flattery and not reality, right, then we can discover that a pleasant feeling arose out of ignorance and ego. And so when we see that pleasant feeling for what it is, and we allow it to just disappear on its own, then we can come back pretty firmly into reality, right? Come back to the present moment. Because even if we feel that those words of praise were in harmony with the truth, right? Let's say whomever praised you, what they say is truthful. So you want a reward and they're praising you for your good work, right? And so it's not necessarily based on flattery, but based in reality. But we need to still continue to observe that feeling, that pleasant feeling brought about by those words of praise. Because that way, if we are able to mindfully observe those words of praise, then it helps us avoid pride and arrogance. And these are the two things that are two major things that will obstruct us on our progress on our path. Then as we continue to practice mindful observation, we will continue to make that progress, and those words of praise as they come along in the future again, instead of being as proud and arrogant, they will become words of encouragement and inspiration. Because when we can see things for what they are, versus allowing that arrogance or pride and be like, oh yeah, I did that, I'm great, I'm amazing, I won this award, I deserve it, right? These are this will potentially hold you into that same routine of yeah, I'm the best, right? Which you may be, right? You may be the best of what you do, but holding on to that type of arrogance, I suppose, or mindset will not help you recognize or help you realize or accept words of judgment, for instance, right? Someone may praise you, but someone else may try to put you down. And that putting you down is going to cause way more stress than trying to keep up with the words of praise. So whether you get praise or judgment, right, we have to be able to determine the nature of those feelings, really dig down and see where they come from. Not just by whom said it, but how you feel about it, right? This is all about you. This is your feelings of taking those words of praise as pleasant or unpleasant or neutral. Another example is that we can see that one person, while they work, for instance, right, they're doing the work is nothing but agony. They're distressed. They are not happy, and the only way they would be happy is by not working. Whereas on the other hand, someone may feel uneasy when they have nothing to do, right? They want some work, right? And so on one hand, working brings joy, a pleasant feeling, while on the other hand, working brings unpleasant feelings, right, of drudgery and boredom. But we often don't see that we often don't recognize those as potential hindrances. Do I want to go into that? No, I'm not going to go into that. Okay. I'll go into that in our next class. But we have to also recognize that regardless of whether you like working, don't like working, or want something to do or not want something to do, the Buddha is always trying to remind us that we often don't see that we have all the conditions necessary for happiness. And we go looking for happiness in other places or things. So just being able to breathe, for instance, the Buddha tells us that it is a great source of real happiness. But often, unless we have a congested nose or asthma, right, we are unable to realize that. We don't remember that breathing is a great source of happiness, a great source of joy. It's only when we have the ability to not breathe that we recognize, oh man, I miss breathing correctly and right without a, congested nose. And so it's generally after we lose an element of happiness that we appreciate it a little bit more, right? It's only after we lose something that we appreciate it. So think of a toothache, right? It's only when we have a toothache that we appreciate the not having a toothache feeling, the pleasant feeling of not having a toothache, or a stomach ache, or anything else, right? It's only when something bad is happening to us that we remember that not having that bad thing is important. But the majority of the time, we always have the not bad thing happening. Majority of the time, you don't have a toothache. The majority of the time, you don't have a headache. The majority of the time, you don't have a stomach ache. The majority of the time, you feel pretty okay in life. It's only when things go against that we recognize that, oh man, I'm hurting. I wish I wasn't hurting. I have a headache. I wish I didn't have a headache. I have a toothache. I wish I didn't have a toothache. So it's only during those times that we are going through something that we recognize the appreciation of not having it. But the majority of our time is when we don't have it. So why aren't you appreciating it when you don't have it, right? And that's on us because we don't practice mindfulness. And so the Buddha also tells us that peace, joy, and happiness are above all the awareness that we have the conditions for happiness. Thus, mindfulness is the basic and essential ingredient for happiness. Because if you don't know that you're happy, then you're probably not really happy. Because if you're happy, you know you're happy. If you don't know you're happy, then you're not happy. And so when a feeling is born in us, right, this goes back to the mindfulness exercise. When a feeling is born in us, we know that it is born. As long as that feeling continues to be present, we know that it is present, and it continues to be present within us. And so we look at it mindfully in order to be able to recognize its nature, whether it's pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. We have to look at its roots. Is it physical, physiological, psychological? And its fruit. Again, physiological, psychological, or social, right? Okay, all that was the pleasant side of things. So I'm going to stop there for this piece, and then next class I'll continue with commentary on unpleasant and neutral feelings for exercise 12. But the moral of the story for these exercises, right? So exercise 11 is identifying feelings. Just generally, there is a feeling arising in me, or I have a feeling arising in me. And then we move on to exercise 12, and that's specifically identifying the feeling, whether it's pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, and being able to, at that point, dig deeper into its roots, into its substance, and seeing what that feeling is, how that feeling manifested, and why that feeling manifested. And so as we go into the unpleasant and neutral feelings in next class, but something that I'm going to mention something now because it's probably something that we all experience or have experienced in our meditation. Is that we know that in meditation, it's important to be able to sync our mind and body, right? In the present moment, being here now in the present moment with our mind and body. Because oftentimes when we're sitting in meditation, right, and you're like, okay, I'm gonna focus on my breathing, that's my object of meditation. I'm sitting here, I'm doing that, I'm breathing, I'm observing. Then all of a sudden, a thought arises, Let's say the thought is hunger, right? Because it's almost lunchtime. We're like, okay, I'm hungry now. If we're unmindful, the mind's going to run with it. All right, I'm hungry. What do I want for lunch? I want to pick up something on my way home. I want to go order something. I want to sit down somewhere. I want to go back home and cook it. Do I need ingredients? Do I need to go to the grocery store, et cetera, et cetera? So you have this whole manifest of things to do or ask yourself, and that creates, that then transforms a transfer, and that creates, not creates, but then that moves the mind elsewhere. So your body is here sitting in meditation, but your mind is at HEB, figuring out what groceries you want to get, right? And so that means your mind and body are not synced. Your mind and body are not in harmony. And so that's why, again, we make observations and create labels. And again, the labels can be very basic, right? Whether if you hear the AC go on and off, just say sound or AC. The dog's barking could just be dog or bark or sound. The door opening could just be door, sound, right? It doesn't have to be anything super dramatic or super detailed. But by allowing or by giving things a one-word label, that stops your mind from continuing on with the story and creating a whole movie from the simple act of the door opening. Because otherwise, if you're sitting and you hear the door open, you're going to ask yourself, oh, who's at the door? Why are they here? What are they doing? Why are they disturbing my meditation? How dare they? Don't they know what we're doing? Right? So your whole mind goes off into la la land, making all these excuses for the simple act of the door opening. But that is part of our ignorance. Ignorance here means not knowing. Okay? In Buddhism, ignorance means not knowing. And so since we don't know why the door opened or who's at the door, we simply just have to say sound or door. It doesn't matter who they are. It doesn't matter why they're here. It doesn't matter why they're disturbing meditation. It doesn't matter. All those things that we give thought to means nothing. But because our mind is kind of dumb sometimes, and it's curious and and unwise, it wants to create those stories. It wants to fill in the gaps, right? It wants to make excuses. It wants to give reason to why the door opened, even though it doesn't know, but it wants to make up a story just to make itself feel good. That is part of our ignorance. And that's something that we need to watch in meditation, but especially off the cushion. Because we do that all the time. We do that all the time. Right? We go on the highway, traffic slows down. What's the first thing we ask ourselves? Is there an accident? Right? And then we go into the whole story of where is the accident? What kind of accident? How many cars are involved? How many people are involved? Who caused it? How did it get caused? How long is this traffic for? How far down the road is this accident? Right? We ask all these stupid questions. We create all these scenarios and stories for the simple fact that we're just slowing down. That's it. But we are so ignorant that we add and create these stories just to make ourselves feel better. Yes. Right.
say when to overthink it for like 10 days?
Well, it depends on the severity, right? Whether or not you need medication, right, is one thing. Because meditation is not a fix-all, right? Even though meditation, as I mentioned, it has a very physical, psychological, and physiological effect, but it can only do so much most of the time. But what it can do is at least lessen the problems that a person with ADHD may have, right? It may not cure them all the way, but it may lessen and help help the mind create a new routine, right? Because one thing that ADHD does is reprogram the mind into a routine of, let's say, OCD, for instance, right? I used to suffer with OCD with counting. I would have to, like, I remember when I was a kid, I was sitting in the car with my parents, I would count every even number of light posts, and I couldn't stop. I would do it with my finger. I still do it every once in a while now with my fingers. I'll start counting things. But it's such a it's such a habit, right? It's a kind of an OCD habit to fill in gaps, fill in the silence, fill in the boredom, right? Think of boredom, for instance. If you're home alone, you have nothing to do. We're like, oh, I'm bored. Well, you're not really bored. What's happening is you're uncomfortable being by yourself, doing nothing. Doing nothing is uncomfortable. And we label that as boredom. Because we're afraid that if we sit with ourselves in silence, things may arise that will make us uncomfortable. Right? Be like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have said that last night. Maybe I shouldn't have started this argument. Right? All these emotions of regrets or delusions or whatever else may arise, cause you to think, cause you to panic, cause you to have emotions, and the mind doesn't want that. And so it's like, okay, well, instead of dealing with our crap, let's fill it in with doing stupid stuff, watching TV, listening to music, going to the club, drinking, whatever it may be, right? And so in meditation, the whole goal of meditation is to observe the mind and understand the mind and why the mind works the way it works. That's the goal of meditation, right? The goal, because if you think the goal of meditation is to be able to sit with a clear mind, empty mind of no thinking, no thoughts, and just sit in silence, it's the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my life. What's the point of that? What is happening if you're just sitting doing nothing? That's not meditation, that's sleeping, right? So meditation has to have a goal. And so in Buddhist meditation specifically, there is a goal. And the goal is to figure out how the mind works and why the mind works the way it works. So that's why we say we have to figure out the roots, the psychological, the physical, the physiological roots of all the thoughts and feelings that arise. Because if we can dig down and ask ourselves, so when an emotion, when an emotion or feeling arises, anything, boredom, anger, frustration, anxiety, it's one thing to recognize, okay, I'm feeling anger, right? That's very superficial. The next question is to ask, why am I feeling anger? And you get to an answer. And then once you have that answer, you ask yourself again, why? You have another answer, why? Why? You continue to ask yourself why and why, until you get to the very root, to the very core of that anger. And from there, you're like, that is it. That is why I'm angry. And then depending on what it is, right, but you'll know what to do with it once you get to the true core, right? Because sometimes it may not be very easy to get to the core of the issue, especially since we're all grown adults, and whatever feeling of anger arose could be something that's been harvesting or manifesting within you for decades, for your entire life, right? And so trying to get to the root cause may take some time. It may take a few sessions, it may take a few weeks, months even. But once you get to the core of the root of the issue, that aha moment, you'll recognize it immediately. And once you have that aha moment, then depending on what it is, let's say if it's a person, for instance, that's causing you this anger, now you have a decision to make. Well, now I know it's this specific person that's causing me all these emotions, all this turmoil, all these things that I don't want to feel or go through. Now you have a decision to make. You can either change the type of relationship you have with them. You can maybe unfriend them, maybe cut them off completely. Whatever you think needs to happen. But that's essentially one of the goals of meditation. The other goal of meditation is to calm the mind, is to try to tame the mind. And to tame the mind, people often try to do it forcefully. So if you do have ADHD, right, and you're trying to like force yourself to stop thinking so much, well, forcing yourself to stop thinking so much isn't going to work. It's only going to make it worse, actually, right? And so earlier, as I mentioned, the practice of letting go isn't to cut off the thinking, isn't to try to disconnect it, but it's to simply acknowledge that a thought has happened or is happening, right? That you're thinking, you know that you're thinking, you accept the thinking, you label what the thinking is or what the thought is, and it'll naturally let go, right? Especially when you meditate. If you sit in meditation with the goal of concentrating on your breath as the object of meditation, right? And you make that your goal in your mind, then as thoughts arise or distractions arise, you simply just have to acknowledge the thought. And it naturally will go on its own. It'll disappear, right? Because unfortunately, we're not the masters of our mind yet. We're slaves to our mind. And so the mind is trying to control us. And the way the mind controls us is by forcing its own agenda onto us, right? Because the mind has full control over the past and the future. The mind is obsessed with time. So it has full control over the past and has full control over the future. But it does not have control in the present moment. So that's why when we meditate and we're trying to focus on our object of meditation of breathing in the present moment, the mind doesn't like that. It's like, no, I have no control over this. So let me remind you of that argument we had with our husband or wife last week. Let's think about that high school bully for some random reason. Let's think about what we could have said in this argument. Let's think about what would happen if I took that job in Europe or whatever. Or think about the future. Let's think about what we want for lunch. Let's think what we want to do tonight, Saturday. Do we want to go out? Do we want to have fun? Do we want to sit? Do we want to relax? Do we want to see a movie? And so it has all this control and past and future that's trying to drown you in, because that's what it has control over. But it does not have control of the present moment, because nothing happens in the present moment, right? The present moment just is. So it has no control over it. So it's trying to force you to think of the past and the future. So our job is to try to override that mind of controlling the past and the future and just sticking with the present moment. And the way we do that is to acknowledge those distractions, those thoughts as they arise, when they arise, as quickly as possible. And the simple acknowledgement of it will allow it to disappear. That's it. That's all it takes. Because the mind's like, oh, okay, you caught me. I'm going to run away. And then 2 minutes later, another thought comes up, right? And you catch it and you're like, okay, you caught me, and it runs away. It's exactly what happens. The quicker you're able to catch those, the better. Sometimes it may take a few seconds. Maybe it takes a few minutes. Maybe it even takes your entire meditation session to recognize this wandering thought. But that's perfectly fine. It doesn't matter how long it takes you to recognize a thought, as long as you recognize it. whether it takes you seconds, minutes, or hours. As long as you recognize that thought arising, you caught it, it's exactly what you're supposed to do. That is 100% the goal of meditation, is to catch that thought. And the more you're able to do that more routinely, more naturally, the easier it becomes and the less and less thoughts start to arise. And so when you're overthinking, acknowledge that you're overthinking. Don't try to push it and say, stop overthinking, because you're forcing it. There's no good outcome when you're forcing it, right? Yes, you can use force to stop, but it's not going to be lasting. It won't last very long, because you can only maintain that force, mental power, for so long before your mind gets exhausted and can't stop forcing it out. So the best way to acknowledge that is to just acknowledge the thoughts. The thoughts just want attention, right? Distractions only want attention. And so the more you give it attention, the more it's going to cling to you. The more you cling to those thoughts and emotions, the more attention you give to it. So the simple monogamy of, okay, I see you, thanks, move on to the next, right? And as you do that more routinely, right, on and off the cushion of meditation, the easier it becomes to recognize and be aware of those overthinking thoughts or the overflow of thoughts. And eventually they'll lessen, get smaller and smaller, and have shorter periods of time, shorter and shorter, until eventually, hopefully, one day you'll have no thoughts. Yes, sir.
Well, I was thinking about these principles you were just talking about, and then I put them over the story of driving and seeing an accident. And so you're driving along and you come across an accident. That's the present moment. It's happening right there.
Right.
So if we look over, we see there's a car and this, we just see just what's there. You're saying that's okay because that's real.
Right.
But what we need to do is then take our attention off of that, going, I see what's there, there's no way I'm going to understand everything. And then let your mind, pull your mind, or allow your mind to come away from it. But then I kept thinking, okay, so you do that, you're pretty successful. And you're driving down the road and you think of the accident, you catch yourself thinking about the accident. There it is again, right? So, that's how we work with it. It comes up and recognize, I just saw the accident. I shouldn't really be inventing what's happening in the accident.
Right.
So you're able to let that go. And so it might not just be one thing, it might be a whole process. So then you think, well, I want to think about my driving. So all of a sudden you catch yourself thinking about your destination, what you're going to do there. That's the same as inventing the accident, right?
Yeah.
So the whole point is to be in your car at that mile marker, looking at the trees and the cars that are around you.
Exactly. Because thinking of past and present, if you're on the highway, right, and you're slowing down, the mind is already thinking of the future, right? What is happening? I think an accident happened. I think this. I think that, right? So that's thinking about the future. And you pass by the accident and you see it, and like, okay, acknowledge the accident as the present. And as you drive by, as I mentioned, then the accident comes back again, right? So now there's past thoughts of, you're thinking, oh, what caused the accident? Who was involved? How was it involved? Et cetera, et cetera. You ask yourself questions. And so you have to be really careful about that. You have to be really careful about how the mind is thinking of things. Is it the past, is it the present, or is it the future? Because if it's the past or the future, well then, the past has already happened, there's nothing you can do about it, there's no change, and the future hasn't happened yet, so why obsess over it? The only time you have control over is the present moment. Especially in driving, because you have to be present to be a defensive driver, right? Otherwise, if you're not present and being a defensive driver, then you're going to cause accidents potentially. You may not see someone in your blind spot when you're trying to merge over, or whatever it may be, right? There's a million things that can happen in a car on the highway when you're not paying attention. So mindfulness can be taken in any activity, right? Mindfulness is not a strict meditation practice. It's something that we can utilize in everyday life for anything, for everything. Any little mundane thing you do can be done with mindfulness.
This is our training for that.
Exactly. So meditating here in a conducive environment of peace and serenity and all that jazz, right, will help you use those same exercises and the practices off the cushion. So I mean, think when walking back to your car, right? Use that opportunity of walking meditation to be mindful, to practice on mindfulness. Where does your mind go? What is your mind thinking of? Right? Because I guarantee you, whether you walked here or there, your mind wasn't present. You were thinking of something else. Right? I almost guarantee everyone has done that. But that's not practice. And of course, it's going to be difficult to be mindful 24/7, right? But again, the mind is a muscle. The mind can be trained. And so the more you have the intention to be mindful in any and every situation, the more your mind gets used to it and it starts to create that habit, it starts to create that routine. That way, then mindfulness eventually can be something that's automatic. You don't have to think to be mindful. You don't have to remind yourself to be mindful. You just are. So when you see something, you recognize that it is what you see it for what it is, and not make stories of it. So when you see an accident, you don't make a story of who, how, and why. You simply observe and acknowledge accidents.
And it wouldn't keep coming up in your mind later.
Right.
Or it would, but if you practice demons, that would lessen until finally.
Exactly. So again, even if you get pulled into that thinking, right? If you're thinking of the accident, again, it's okay to think, right? It's a habit. It's a natural human thing to do, to think. But the problem is that we don't know that we're thinking. That's the problem. And so as long as we know that we're thinking, that's all we need to do. Because when we know that we're thinking, we have power over what is happening in the mind. If we do not know what we're thinking or that we're thinking, then the mind has power over us. That's not what we want, right? We want to have that control. We want to have that power. We want to be able to tame the mind the way we want it to be tamed, instead of it trying to tame us with entertaining thoughts and thoughts of who, why, and where, of accidents or people or things or whatever it may be. So to think is okay, but we have to know that we're thinking. That's why I said, regardless of how long it takes you to recognize a thought or a distraction, whether it takes you a few seconds, a few minutes, hours, or your whole session of meditation, as long as you're able to recognize a thought or the thinking is happening, that's 100% what you're supposed to do. That is 100% the goal of meditation. Is to know that you're thinking and you've caught it, you become aware of it. Because the moment you do not, what are you doing? You're daydreaming, right? It doesn't become a meditation, it just becomes daydreaming. Now you're just like, all right, this is a nice quiet place, let me just sit and think about food or think about work next week, right? What good does that do you? Not very much. Okay, I'm gonna stop there and we'll continue with the remaining commentary of exercise 12 next class. Any questions, concerns, emotional outbursts before we do our sitting meditation?
done exercise 11 a lot in the past. And I remember in one instance, I used it in particular because I just kind of had like a stream of these thoughts coming in. And I tried getting rid of them, I tried forcing them to stop until one time I was like, I'm just gonna let them go. And they just kind of like went wild. But then it was kind of a strange experience because then thoughts would come and go, but I didn't feel like I was thinking them. I actually felt like I was just like sitting on a couch, just like watching these thoughts come by, and it almost felt out of, it's not the right word, out of body. I'm like observing someone else's thoughts as they're coming by. Well, then now, if I'm sitting there observing them, where are those thoughts coming?
It's a great Zen question. It's a great question. I'm not going to answer it. It's for you to answer. Something that we do in more advanced techniques of meditation is to watch the thinking, right? And so if you have a thought, if you generate a thought, you know that you're generating a thought. You know what that thought is, right? But that is a characteristic or habit of the mind, right? Because the mind is telling us we are making those thoughts happen. But in reality, that's not how the mind actually works scientifically, right? Because we can remove ourselves from that thinking and simply watch the thoughts happening. So like in your case, you're watching these thoughts happen outside of yourself, right? Which is a very difficult thing to do, right? Because if you try to do it, if you're unpracticed or not very well versed in practice, what tends to happen is you get in the state of mind where you think you're watching the thoughts as they happen, but then slowly you get sucked into the thoughts, and now you're part of the thinking. You're not really watching it. Now you're working with the thinking. So that's a very common habit, which is fine, because then that allows you to recognize that now you're engaged in the thinking. You need to remove yourself again, right? And so now you have to watch. Now you have to become the observer of what is being observed by the mind, which sounds complicated, and it kind of is. that's something that you would want to eventually do, because one of the reasons we do that is if you're watching the thoughts happen, right? You're not engaged with the thoughts. You're not doing the thinking. The thing is just happening, and you're able to step away from it and just watch. At that point, it becomes easier to recognize what these thoughts are, how they emerged, how they manifested, how they came about, where they came from, what are their roots, what are their substance, and you're really able to dissect and analyze those thoughts without attaching any emotion or self to it, right? Correct. Now they don't become my anger, my happiness, I'm hurt, I'm blah, blah, blah. It just becomes anger, hate, jealousy, right? These are things that are not you, but the mind makes them seem like they are.
Our goal is no self. Right?
Eventually, yes. Non-self. Yes, ma'am.
So don't take your thoughts personal.
Basically, don't take your thoughts personally. Exactly.
What is that space between the thoughts? What is that calm? What is that look like? What is that feel like?
Sounds like you already know. Sounds like you kind of already know.
Freedom. Freedom is the answer. Exactly, peace, equanimity, upeksha, equanimity. Equanimity are those gaps in between thoughts of no thinking. So in Buddhism, when we talk about liberation or enlightenment, it's referencing more or less freedom from thinking. Means thinking doesn't happen, right? Because we know thinking is what causes suffering. Thinking leads to feelings, leads to emotions, leads to thoughts, leads to blah, 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 right? It goes down the road. And so no thinking leads to peace of mind with equanimity, right, upeksha. And equanimity is the state of mind that we are trying to all achieve. Which we often do in meditation, right? Because depending on your meditation, right, we'll have gaps of good meditation and we get distracted or something happens and we have another gap of good no thinking, just peaceful, right? And so there's phases in our meditation that we kind of go in and out of, right? And so our goal is, of course, maintain for longer periods those good phases of no thinking, no thoughts, right? The in between the thinking. Because we think we have like millions of thoughts a day, right? Millions of thoughts a day. And we think that the thoughts just go from one to another, right? They're back to back to back to back. But in reality, there's actually some empty space in between each thought, right? And though we don't necessarily see or recognize those little tiny empty spots, but just knowing that they exist, right? Knowing that we're able to hone and manifest those little empty spots and make them bigger and bigger and bigger, we do that by recognizing that thoughts happen in the first place. So we're able to recognize that we're thinking or we're distracted or we're feeling some type of emotion or feeling. The more we recognize that and see it for what it is and able to let it go, then we're taking one distraction out of the equation, right? Even though you may have 1,000 distractions, if you take one out, well, now you have 999. And you work on more meditation, you take another one out, now you have 998. Take another one, I have 997, right? And so even though progress may seem slow sometimes, but because you have your entire life, right, as a habit of the mind, your entire life, unless we've been meditating for most of our life, or meditating since we're young, which most people have not, they had the entire life of distractions and emotions and feelings that arise in the mind, right? And so to try to remove those, it's going to take a lot of time. To remove those habits and routines that our mind has constantly done our entire lives, it's going to take time. And so when we're able to discover a negative or unwholesome thought or feeling or sensation or emotion or distraction and remove it, we may not feel like that's an accomplishment because it's only one out of a billion, but it's a huge accomplishment because then you can say, okay, that worked. I can go back in and take another one out. And you go back in and take another one out. You take more and more out. And eventually you'll have a very little to no thoughts. You have very little to no distractions. As we progress with meditation and we recognize, depending on how long we've been meditating for, right? We'll see at the very beginning, for most people, that the mind is very chaotic. The mind is a playground. It just wants to jump and bounce and swing and run and do all these different things, right? It's on recess 24/7. It's on the playground 24/7. But then as we start to practice more and more, and we recognize the players in this playground, right? Of all the people, all the things and emotions and thoughts and opinions that are running and jumping and doing all these things. And we tame them, right? We only have to tame one at a time because we can't tame the entire mind all at the same time, right? There's no way. But if we're able to hold one back and catch someone or something that's running and jumping and causing chaos and tame them, then that's exactly what we're supposed to do. You've tamed them, put them aside. Now they're just an observer of what is happening. Then you grab another one, you tame them, you add them to the observer, and you have two observers. You take another one, you tame them, and you put them on observers. And so the more you're able to take things away, the more room you have to see, right? Because now, think of it, you think of just, let's cleaning up a park, cleaning up a trash in the park, right? If you're one person trying to clean all the trash in this giant park, will take forever, right? Yeah, you've grabbed a few, cups and some chip bags and some wrappers, right? You've made some progress. But it's going to take you a long time to clean up the entire park. But if more people come and join you in cleaning, then more trash is cleaned up at a faster rate. And the more the entire park itself is cleaned up at a faster rate. So likewise, when we meditate and we grab something that is chaotic and subdue it and allow it to observe, you have two more people, observers, to pay attention to what is causing the mind to be chaotic. And you find another chaotic element and you take it and you tame it and you add it to observer and you have three observers looking at the chaos. So the more you take away, right, the more you gain to see, to observe, to recognize. Which again, isn't easy, but when it happens, I hope at least, that when it happens, because it will happen with practice, that it will encourage you to want to get more observers, right? Especially if we have a chaotic, overthinking mind. What we truly want is the overthinking to slow down, at least to slow down, right? Not to stop, because never stop. But if we at least can slow it down, it takes a lot of stress off the mind of running, because overthinking uses a lot of energy, right? And we want to utilize that energy for something that's more beneficial, other than overthinking. And so it's a give and take. It's a give and take. It's a type of collecting, transforming, and reusing, right? Meaning that we take the chaos, we tame it, and we make it an observer. And that's how that's how we create more observers. And then back to Quang point that we can watch the thinking as it happens. That way, those thinking is not us. This thinking is the mind doing its thing. And we can either use those thoughts in a wholesome way or unwholesome way or a neutral way. Tame them, we can expand on them, we can utilize them to our benefit, meaning that, let's say you're watching a thought on a topic that you heard in meditation class or during a Sunday service, right? Because in meditation, there's two types of meditations. There's concentration and there's contemplation. And so in concentration type of meditation, there's no insight realized, right? Because you're simply just trying to perfect your concentration. You're trying to perfect your focus. You're trying to literally perfect the type of concentration you have. Nothing happens. There's no true realizations. There's no true insight or wisdom involved. But when we contemplate, that means we're taking a teaching, we're taking a topic, we're taking something and we're dissecting it, we're analyzing it, we're pulling it into its little pieces to see what it's truly made out of so that we can absorb that knowledge, that insight, and then true insight and wisdom arises. I forgot what my point was. Oh, the thinking, right. And so that way, when we're out of the thinking and we're watching the thinking happen, again, we could be watching a thought that is a good thought, right? Let's say the thought arose about something we read about the Four Noble Truths, for instance, right? We can take that thought aside and then use contemplation to work with that thought of the Four Noble Truths. And that's a good thought. But unless we're watching or thinking, we won't be able to recognize that something good that we can use because we're just going with the motion of thinking. Okay, I've talked way too much and I'm giving us way less time to meditate. So I'm going to stop talking. There's so much more. It's endless. I can literally talk about feelings for 10 years and not being halfway done. But anyway, we'll stop there. So for today's practice, or today's meditation, utilize the exercises of identifying feelings. And categorize them as pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, right? And continue with them as they stay with you. So if you're sitting, for instance, and the feeling of discomfort, whether maybe your feet or legs are falling asleep or your back is aching, make the mindful observation of breathing in, I'm aware that I am feeling discomfort. Breathing out, I'm aware that I'm feeling discomfort. And you continue to do that practice until the sensation of discomfort phases out. Because it may take some time, but eventually that discomfort will phase out, right? And so you continue to stay with that feeling for the full duration of the feeling. And then let it go and move on to something else, right? And it could be anything else. Whether the door opened, breathing in, I'm aware that I heard a sound. Breathing out, I'm aware that I heard a sound. And since the door just opens and shuts, it's not going to stay for a long period of time, like a discomfort or pain, right, in the body. So whatever arises, again, this is a more detailed form of labeling. And you're adding more to the practice by stating, breathing in, I feel whatever, breathing out, I feel whatever, or I'm aware that I feel whatever, right? I would add the word aware. That way your mind will start to create that habit of I'm aware of what's happening. I'm aware of what I'm feeling, right? Otherwise, you're just gonna be like, I'm angry. I'm jealous. I hate this. I'm anxious. Blah, 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 right? It's whatever. It's nonchalant. But if you at least acknowledge that you're aware of it, that gives you more power over those feelings. And the power doesn't control you. So use that as our practice for meditating. So we will sit. I know we're so over time, but I'm still going to give us 15, 20 minutes to sit. And then we'll do some walking meditation. So do a quick stretch if you need to. Don't take too long.